Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, her knuckles white as she gripped the command rail. Through the reinforced viewports, the massive ring structure of the Galactic Council Station dominated the starfield ahead. The ancient alien megastructure was easily 50 kilometers across, its crystalline spires and biometallic surfaces gleaming with an otherworldly beauty that had once filled humanity with wonder. Now it only filled her with rage. The station's automated defense systems had already painted her fleet with targeting scanners, but they hadn't fired. They wouldn't dare, not yet. The Council still believed they held all the cards, still thought humanity would bow and scrape like every other species that had come crawling to them for membership in their precious galactic community. They were about to learn how wrong they were. "Admiral," came the voice of Commander Rodriguez from the communications station, his tone carefully neutral despite the tension crackling through the bridge. "The Council is hailing us. They're demanding we stand down and present ourselves for judgment." Sarah's laugh was bitter. Judgment, as if they had any right to judge humanity after what they'd done, after what they'd allowed to happen. "Tell them," she said, her voice carrying across the bridge with deadly calm, "that humanity is done asking for permission." Behind her, the rest of Battle Group Terra waited in perfect formation. 37 ships, their hulls scarred and blackened from the desperate running battles that had brought them here. They were the last free human fleet, the final remnant of Earth's military might after the Zephyrian Purge. The Purge. Even thinking about it made Sarah's jaw clench. 3 months ago, humanity had been so close to acceptance into the Galactic Council. Their application for membership had been under review for 5 years, and finally, it seemed like they would be granted the same rights and protections as the other spacefaring civilizations. Then the Zephyrians had struck. It wasn't supposed to be possible. The Galactic Council's laws were absolute. No member species could wage war against a pending applicant. It was one of their most sacred principles, supposedly enforced by the combined might of every Council fleet. But when the Zephyrian Armada had descended on Earth's outer colonies, when their bioweapons had turned entire worlds into graveyards, when their hunter-killer fleets had hunted down refugee ships like animals, the Council had done nothing. They had watched. They had debated. They had formed committees and subcommittees and study groups. And while they talked, 18 billion humans had died. "Sir," the tactical officer called out, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Zephyrian signatures detected. Looks like 3 heavy cruisers docked at the station's northern hub." Sarah nodded grimly. Of course they were here, probably receiving commendations for their successful pacification operation, while humanity's survivors scattered to the outer rim like rats. "Admiral," Rodriguez spoke up again, "the Council is transmitting surrender terms. They're offering safe passage if we withdraw immediately and submit to arbitration." "Arbitration?" Sarah repeated, tasting the word like poison. The same arbitration they offered the Kepler colony survivors? The same justice they gave to the children of New Geneva? The bridge fell silent. Every officer present had lost someone in the purge. Families, friends, entire homeworlds reduced to radioactive ash, while the galaxy's supposed peacekeepers wrung their tentacles and declared it an internal matter. Sarah turned to face her crew, seeing her own determination reflected in their eyes. They all knew this was a suicide mission. The Council station was protected by energy shields that could withstand stellar bombardment, defended by automated systems that had never failed in 10,000 years of operation. But that was before they faced humans who had nothing left to lose. "Helm," Sarah commanded, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Take us in. All ships weapons free. Today we show the galaxy what happens when you corner a human." The Defiance surged forward, her engines burning white-hot as the rest of the fleet followed suit. Warning klaxons began blaring across the station as its defense grid came online, particle beam arrays and missile platforms swiveling to track the incoming human ships. For a moment, the space around the Council station looked almost peaceful. Then the first salvo of human plasma torpedoes struck the outer shields, and the galaxy's longest-held beliefs about warfare, about civilization, about the nature of humanity itself, began to burn. Sarah watched the enemy point defense systems desperately trying to intercept the incoming barrage and allowed herself a grim smile. The Zephyrians had taught humanity many things during their systematic slaughter of human worlds. They had taught them that mercy was weakness. They had taught them that the strong devoured the weak without consequence. Most importantly, they had taught humanity exactly how much damage a species could inflict when it stopped. Playing by the rules, the Council was about to receive a very thorough education in applied human warfare. As the first of their shields collapsed under the relentless human assault, Sarah keyed her fleet-wide comm channel. Her words would be recorded, transmitted across the galaxy, remembered for generations of humans who would never again bow to alien authority. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Fleet. We came to you in peace, seeking nothing more than recognition and protection under your laws. You failed us. You failed our children. You failed every principle you claim to represent. Her voice grew harder with each word. Today we collect payment for that failure. Today you learn why humans never forget a betrayal. The war for humanity's place in the galaxy had begun. The Council Chamber's emergency session had devolved into chaos within minutes of the human attack beginning. High Counselor Vexithara of the Altarian hegemony watched in growing horror as tactical displays showed the impossible unfolding before their eyes. Human ships, primitive by galactic standards, were systematically dismantling defenses that had protected the station for millennia. "This is unprecedented," shrieked Counselor Zith, his crystalline form pulsing with agitated bioluminescence. "No species has ever dared attack the Council station directly." "Perhaps," rumbled the massive Crothan representative, his rocky hide scarred from countless battles. "That is because no species has ever been failed so completely by this body." The accusation hung in the air like a poison cloud. Around the circular chamber, representatives from 100 different worlds shifted uncomfortably. They all knew what the Crothan meant. The Zephyrian incident had been a catastrophic failure of Council law and principle. The humans were not yet members, Counselor Fleek protested, his gelatinous form quivering with indignation. "We had no legal obligation to intervene in their conflict with the Zephyrians." "Legal obligation," the Crothan repeated, his voice like grinding stone. "While 18 billion sentients died screaming, while refugee children were hunted through space like game animals. Legal obligation." On the central display, another section of the station's outer defense grid went dark. The humans were using some kind of focused plasma bombardment that seemed to bypass their energy absorption matrices entirely. Worse, their ships were coordinating with a precision that spoke of extensive combat experience. High Counselor Vexithara had seen the intelligence reports. Before the Zephyrian Purge, humans had been considered a curiosity, a young species with innovative technology, but limited military capability. They fought their wars with kinetic weapons and chemical explosives, primitive tools by galactic standards. The ships attacking them now bore no resemblance to those primitive vessels. These were machines of war, their hulls blackened and scarred, their weapon systems jury-rigged and overcharged for maximum destruction. They fought like they had nothing to lose because they didn't. "Status report," she commanded, her translator converting her musical tones into standard galactic. "Outer perimeter breached," came the terrified voice of the station's military coordinator. "They're targeting our docking bay specifically. It appears they intend to board us." "Board us?" Counselor Zith's light patterns flickered in disbelief. "Impossible. Our security forces are the finest in the galaxy." The Crothan laughed, a sound like an avalanche. "These are not the timid supplicants who came begging for membership, little crystal. These are the survivors of genocide, trained in the hardest school the universe offers. They have learned to kill or be killed." As if summoned by his words, the tactical display shifted to show the human fleet's formation. Rather than maintaining safe distances for long-range bombardment, they were charging directly at the station. Their lead ships were already entering the defensive perimeter, weathering point defense fire that should have vaporized them. "Look at their formations," whispered the Elysian counselor, her swan-like neck craning toward the display. "They're using damaged ships as shields for their intact vessels. They're sacrificing their wounded to protect their strong." "Not sacrificing," the Crothan corrected grimly. "Those damaged ships are volunteers. They know they cannot survive the return journey, so they spend their lives buying victory for their comrades. It is the way of warriors." Vexithara felt a chill run through her crystalline matrix. She had read the reports from Zephyrian space, the accounts of human resistance that had seemed almost too savage to believe, crews detonating their own ships rather than surrender, civilian vessels ramming military targets in desperate kamikaze attacks. children as young as 12 taking up arms to defend their homes. The galaxy had dismissed these accounts as Zephyrian propaganda, designed to justify their harsh methods. Now, watching human ships deliberately ram themselves into defensive positions to clear paths for their fellows, Vexithara realized the reports had been accurate. Worse, they had been restrained. "Incoming transmission," announced the communications officer. "The humans are broadcasting on all frequencies." "Put it through," she ordered. The voice that filled the chamber was human, female, carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Attention, Galactic Council. I am Admiral Sarah Chen, commanding what remains of the United Earth Fleet. We have come to collect a debt. For 3 months we have asked you for justice. For 3 months you have given us procedure and bureaucracy while our people died. Today, we dispense our own justice." Another section of the defense grid vanished in a brilliant explosion. Human boarding pods were launching now, dozens of them, screaming toward the station's hull like metallic meteors. "We demand the immediate surrender of all Zephyrian vessels and personnel currently docked at this station. We demand full reparations for the genocide committed against humanity. We demand recognition of humanity's right to exist in this galaxy without your permission or protection." The chamber erupted in panicked chittering and electronic screeching. Surrender? To a species barely out of their home system? The concept was unthinkable. And if we refuse? Vexithara found herself asking. The human's response was ice cold. "Then you will learn why evolution forged humans in war, Counselor. You will discover what 18 billion dead souls can teach a species about hatred. You will understand that when you genocide humans, the survivors don't just mourn, they adapt." The first human boarding pod slammed into the station's hull, their shaped charges carving through armor that had withstood supernovas. Emergency lights bathed the chamber in crimson as decompression alarms wailed throughout the massive structure. "They're inside," someone screamed over the chaos. "Security teams are responding, but by the gods, they're fighting like demons." Vexithara watched the tactical display with growing dread as human forces carved their way deeper into the station. They moved with purpose, ignoring secondary targets and driving straight for the Zephyrian ships. This wasn't random violence or revenge-driven madness. This was precision warfare conducted by beings who had learned to kill efficiently or die trying. "Perhaps," she said quietly as explosions echoed through the ancient halls of galactic power, "we should have intervened after all." The Krauthan's laugh held no humor. "Too late for wisdom now, Counselor. The humans are here to teach us that some lessons can only be learned in blood." Sergeant Marcus Webb crouched behind a twisted mass of alien metal, his plasma rifle humming with deadly energy, as Zephyrian security forces poured into the corridor ahead. The boarding had gone exactly as planned. Too well, if he was being honest. The station's defenses were designed to repel ship-to-ship attacks, not desperate humans with nothing left to lose. "Contact front," shouted Corporal Davis, her weapon already spitting superheated death down the hallway. The Zephyrians returned fire with their bioweapons, streams of corrosive acid that ate through the station's walls like hungry bacteria. Marcus had seen those weapons before. Every human survivor had. They were designed specifically to counter human biology, to dissolve flesh and bone while leaving other species relatively unharmed. The perfect genocide tool, crafted by a species that prided itself on efficient killing. Today the humans had brought their own gifts to the party. Grenade out. Marcus yanked the pin from a modified thermal charge and hurled it around the corner. The explosion that followed wasn't just destructive, it was educational. The Zephyrians had learned to fight other galactic species, beings who followed rules and conventions about warfare. Humans had learned to fight Zephyrians. "Move. Move, move!" Marcus led his squad forward through the dissipating smoke and the screams of wounded aliens. They had studied Zephyrian biology during the long months of running battles, learned exactly where to aim their weapons for maximum effect. The creatures' exoskeletons were tough, but they had weak points. Every species did. You just had to be willing to look for them while they tried to kill you. The squad rounded another corner and found themselves in what looked like a shopping district. Aliens of dozens of species cowered behind crystalline barriers, their translator devices chittering in panic as the humans passed. Marcus felt a brief pang of sympathy for them. They were civilians, not soldiers. Just people trying to live their lives, but sympathy was a luxury humanity could no longer afford. "Sergeant," came Lieutenant Park's voice over the comm, "we've reached the docking hub. The Zephyrian ships are trying to launch. Negative, Marcus replied, already adjusting his squad's route. Weapons free on any ship attempting to flee. No prisoners, no survivors. They want to play exterminator? They can learn what it feels like to be extinct. Behind them, the corridor erupted in fresh gunfire as more Council security forces arrived. These weren't Zephyrians. They looked like some kind of insectoid species, their chitin-plated bodies bristling with energy weapons. They moved with military precision, laying down suppressing fire while their heavy units advanced. Professional soldiers. Finally, a real challenge. Marcus grinned, the expression visible through his helmet's transparent visor. Davis, thermal lance on the ceiling supports. Lopez covering fire on the heavies. Kim, you're with me. We're going hunting. The battle that followed was brutal and swift. The insectoid soldiers were well-trained and properly equipped, but they fought like civilized beings. They took cover, coordinated their movements, tried to minimize collateral damage to the station's structure. The humans fought like humans. Davis melted through the overhead supports with her thermal lance, bringing down a section of ceiling that crushed 3 of the insectoids beneath tons of debris. Lopez didn't bother with aimed shots. He hosed the enemy position with plasma fire until the metal superheated and began to glow. Kim flanked wide through a damaged bulkhead, appearing behind the enemy line like a vengeful ghost. And Marcus simply walked straight down the middle of the corridor, his armor absorbing energy blasts that should have killed him, his weapon cutting down anything that moved with mechanical precision. The insectoids broke and fled after losing half their number in 30 seconds of contact. They had never faced anything like human infantry before, soldiers who treated their own deaths as acceptable casualties as long as they took the enemy with them. "Hub secured," came Park's voice over the radio. "The Zephyrian ships are trapped in dock. Beginning boarding operations now." Marcus smiled grimly as he led his squad deeper into the station. Somewhere ahead, the high and mighty Galactic Council was probably debating what to do about the human problem. They would form committees, hold votes, draft resolutions. While they talked, humans acted. The next section of the station opened into a vast atrium, its walls covered in what looked like living murals that shifted and changed with alien thoughts. In the center, a group of Council security officers had set up a defensive position around what appeared to be some kind of emergency shelter. "Attention, human forces," came a translated voice over the station's comm system. "This is Commander Thiss of Council Security. You are in violation of galactic law. Surrender immediately and you will be granted clemency." Marcus checked his ammunition counter, then keyed his helmet comm. "Commander Thiss, this is Sergeant Webb of the United Earth Marine Corps. You want to know about galactic law? Here's a lesson. When you let someone commit genocide, you forfeit the right to lecture the survivors about rules." "We had no choice," the alien commander protested. "The Zephyrian action was within legal parameters. We could not intervene without violating our own charter." "Legal parameters," Marcus repeated, tasting the words like poison. He thought about New Geneva, where his sister had lived with her 2 young children. The Zephyrians had used a biological weapon there, something that turned the atmosphere itself toxic. It had taken 3 days for everyone on the planet to die. 3 days of screaming that had been broadcast across human space as a warning to other colonies. "You want to talk about legal parameters?" Marcus stepped into the open, his weapon lowered but ready. "My niece was 7 years old when your legal parameters melted her lungs. My nephew was 4. They died begging for someone to help them, and you know what your precious council did? They filed a formal complaint." The alien soldiers shifted uneasily. Some of them were probably parents themselves. Maybe they had children waiting at home, wondering when their parents would return from their important jobs maintaining galactic peace. "Here's the thing about humans," Marcus continued, his voice carrying across the atrium with deadly calm. "We remember. We adapt, we learn, and what you taught us is that mercy is weakness. That civilization is a luxury for species strong enough to survive without it." He raised his weapon. "Thank you for the lesson." The battle for the atrium lasted less than 5 minutes. When it was over, Marcus and his squad continued their advance toward the council chambers, leaving behind them a trail of wreckage and the bitter smell of burned ozone. Behind them, emergency crews worked frantically to contain the damage, to repair systems, to restore order to their perfect galactic civilization. Ahead of them, the greatest deliberative body in the galaxy debated and argued and tried to find a diplomatic solution to the human problem. Neither group understood what they were dealing with. The emergency crews thought this was just another terrorist attack that could be contained and repaired. The Council thought this was just another primitive species that could be negotiated with and controlled. They were about to learn that humans were something entirely different, something that evolution had forged in the crucible of war, shaped by 10,000 years of killing and dying for causes both noble and savage. They were about to meet a species that had looked into the abyss of extinction and decided to push back. Captain Zareth Kell of the Zephyrian Fourth Fleet watched in growing panic as her escape route dissolved into chaos. The human boarding parties had reached the docking hub faster than anyone thought possible, and now her 3 heavy cruisers were trapped like insects in amber. She had commanded warships for over 40 standard cycles, had led the pacification of 6 different systems, had earned decorations for efficiency and tactical brilliance. Never in her career had she faced an enemy like this. The humans were supposed to be extinct. The Fourth Fleet had done its job too well, had hunted down every last refugee ship, had sterilized every colony world with scientific precision. The galaxy's newest applicant species had been reduced to scattered survivors, hiding in asteroid fields and dead systems. So what were they doing here? Where had they found ships capable of breaching Council defenses? How had they organized a coordinated assault when their entire civilization had been crushed beneath Zephyrian might? "Captain," came the voice of her tactical officer, his biosuit rippling with stress patterns. "The humans are cutting through the docking clamps. Our ships are being boarded." Through the viewport of her command deck, Zareth could see human assault shuttles latched onto the hulls of her vessels like metallic parasites. Shaped charges flashed against armored hulls as the primitive apes carved their way inside with brute force and determination. "Status of the Void Reaper?" she asked, referring to her flagship's sister ship. "Communications lost. Last transmission indicated human forces had reached the engine room. They appear to be dismantling our crews." Dismantling. The euphemism didn't hide what was really happening. The humans weren't taking prisoners. They weren't showing mercy. They were killing every Zephyrian they found with methodical efficiency, just as her people had done to theirs. Zareth felt something she hadn't experienced in decades of warfare. Fear. Real primal terror at the prospect of her own death. It was ironic, she supposed. The Zephyrians prided themselves on being the galaxy's premier exterminators, specialists in removing problematic species from the cosmic equation. They had developed genocide into an art form, a precise science that left no survivors to seek revenge. Apparently, they had missed a few humans. "Captain," her communications officer's voice cracked with panic. "We're receiving a transmission from the human forces. Audio only. Put it through." The voice that filled the command deck was human, male, speaking in heavily accented galactic standard. "This is Colonel James Morrison of the Human Expeditionary Force. I know you're listening, Captain. I know you recognize my voice." Zareth's breath caught in her throat. Morrison. The name from the classified reports. The human commander who had led the defense of Kepler Station. He was supposed to be dead, killed when her ships had cracked that asteroid fortress like an egg and spaced everyone inside. "Surprised to hear from me?" Morrison's voice carried a note of dark amusement. "Yeah, I bet you are. See, funny thing about humans, we're really hard to kill completely. There's always a few of us left crawling around in the wreckage, and we have excellent memories." On the tactical display, Zareth watched human forces systematically work their way through her fleet. They moved with purpose, targeting critical systems and command personnel. This wasn't random violence. It was professional military action conducted by beings who had learned their trade fighting for survival. "I remember the day your ships came to Kepler," Morrison continued. "I remember watching your fighters strafe the refugee camps. I remember your bioweapons turning children into screaming chemical reactions. I remember you broadcasting those final moments to every human settlement as a warning." The Void Reaper's icon on the tactical display suddenly went dark. "Catastrophic systems failure. Her sister ship was dead. You wanted to teach humanity about fear, Captain. Well, congratulations. You succeeded. You taught us to be very, very afraid. But here's the thing about humans. When we get scared enough, we don't run. We get creative." Explosions echoed through the hull of Zareth's ship. The humans had breached their outer defenses and were fighting their way toward the command sections. Her security forces were falling back in disorder. their weapons and tactics designed for suppressing civilian populations rather than fighting hardened military units. We spent 3 months studying everything we could capture from your ships. Morrison's voice was getting closer now, carried through the ship's internal communications as his forces advanced. We learned how your bioweapons work. We learned how your ships function. We learned how your society thinks. The command deck's main entrance exploded inward in a shower of molten metal and superheated gas. Through the smoke and flames, Zarath saw figures in powered armor advancing with weapons raised. Human soldiers, their faces hidden behind reflective visors, moving with the fluid precision of veteran killers. Most importantly, Morrison said, stepping through the breach with his rifle trained on her command crew, we learned that Zephyrians can die just as easily as anyone else. Zarath reached for her sidearm, but stopped when she saw the human's weapon tracking her movement. Around the command deck, her officers had frozen in place, their natural camouflage reflexes turning their hide suits gray with terror. "Colonel Morrison," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady, "I am a prisoner of war. Under Galactic Convention, I demand proper treatment." The human's helmet retracted, revealing a scarred face with cold blue eyes that had seen too much death. He looked older than his species' average lifespan should have allowed, aged by loss and hardship into something harder than the metal of his armor. "Galactic Convention," he repeated, his voice flat and emotionless. "The same convention that protected human civilians. The same rules of war that stopped you from using bioweapons on refugee ships." "That was different," Zarath protested. "Humans were not council members. The conventions did not apply." "You're right," Morrison nodded slowly. "They didn't, just like they don't apply now." He raised his weapon. "You see, Captain, we're not council members either. We're something else entirely. We're the survivors. We're the ones you missed. We're the living reminder that extinction is a two-way street." "Wait." Zarath held up her hands. "I can offer valuable intelligence. Information about Zephyrian fleet dispositions, strategic plans, military capabilities." Morrison paused, considering. "Information, huh? That's interesting. Tell me, Captain, did the human children on New Geneva try to bargain with you? Did they offer you intelligence in exchange for their lives?" The memory hit Zarath like a physical blow. New Geneva had been one of her operations, a small agricultural world with limited defenses. The human colonists had tried to surrender when her fleet arrived, had broadcast pleas for mercy that her computers had automatically translated. She had ignored them, of course. Orders were orders, and Zephyrian efficiency demanded complete eradication. "No," she whispered. "That's what I thought," Morrison said softly. "See, Captain, you taught us that mercy is weakness. You taught us that the only language the galaxy understands is violence. You taught us that when someone threatens human children, you kill them all and let their gods sort it out." His finger tightened on the trigger. "Thank you for the lesson." The plasma bolt took Zarath's center mass, ending her 40 cycles of command in a brief flash of superheated particles. Around her, the rest of the command crew met similar fates as human. Soldiers executed the ancient principle of proportional response. As the tactical displays went dark, and emergency power bathed the command deck in crimson light, Colonel Morrison turned to survey the wreckage of Zephyrian military pride. 3 ships down, he reported over his comm system, proceeding to Phase 3. Outside the viewport, the council station continued to burn. High Counselor Vexithara stood before the massive circular doors of the council chamber, watching as human soldiers methodically placed explosive charges around the ancient barrier. The doors were made of quantum-locked crystalline matrix, supposedly impervious to any known weapon in the galaxy. They had protected the sanctity of galactic deliberation for 10,000 years. The humans had been working on them for exactly 14 minutes. "This is madness," whispered Counselor Fleek, his gelatinous form trembling with each distant explosion that echoed through the station. "They cannot simply assault the seat of galactic government. There are procedures, protocols, established methods for addressing grievances. Tell that to the 18 billion humans who died following your procedures," rumbled the Krauthan representative. Unlike the others, he seemed almost calm, watching the human demolition work with professional interest. "I fought in the sector wars, little one. I know what warriors look like when they have nothing left to." The lead human, a female with sergeant's stripes on her battle-scarred armor, looked up from her work, and noticed the aliens watching through the observation ports. She raised one hand in what might have been a greeting or perhaps a gesture of dismissal, then returned to her charges. "How are they doing this?" demanded Counselor Zith, his crystalline form flickering with agitated bioluminescence. "The quantum locks require harmonic frequencies that should be impossible for their primitive technology to generate." Vexithara had been wondering the same thing. The humans' weapons and equipment appeared crude by galactic standards. Jury-rigged combinations of salvage technology that shouldn't have been capable of breaching even basic council defenses. Yet somehow they had carved through military-grade barriers like they were made of paper. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "their technology is not as primitive as we assumed." On cue, the human sergeant activated something that looked like a handheld resonance scanner. The device emitted a complex harmonic pattern that made the ancient doors shiver and crack along stress lines that hadn't existed moments before. Whatever the humans were using, it was analyzing the crystalline matrix in real time and finding weaknesses that the original designers had never anticipated. "Impossible," breathed Counselor Fleek. "The mathematical principles required for harmonic disruption are beyond the capability of any species less than 1,000 years old. Humans have barely achieved interstellar travel." "Maybe," suggested the Crothan, "that's because they learned a different kind of mathematics. The kind you only discover when someone is trying to kill you." The observation was uncomfortably accurate. Vexthara had read the intelligence reports from the Zephyrian campaign, accounts of human ingenuity that had seemed almost fantastical. Civilian ships converted into weapons of war, industrial equipment repurposed for military use, desperate improvisations that should have failed but somehow worked. The reports had described humans cannibalizing their own infrastructure to build weapons, stripping the hulls from transport vessels to armor their warships, using mining charges as improvised torpedoes. It was crude, inelegant, wasteful by galactic standards. It was also terrifyingly effective. Another harmonic pulse, and a section of the chamber door simply ceased to exist. Not melted or shattered, just gone as if reality had decided that particular piece of matter was no longer required. The gap was large enough for armored figures to pass through, which they immediately began doing. Admiral Sarah Chen was the third human through the breach. Her command armor scarred and blackened from the fighting. She moved with the measured stride of someone who had already won, who knew that resistance at this point was merely a formality. Behind her came a mixed group of human soldiers and what looked like technical specialists. They spread out across the chamber floor with practiced efficiency, some taking defensive positions while others began setting up equipment that Vexithara didn't recognize. "Honorable counselors," Admiral Chen said, her translator converting her words into the formal tones of diplomatic address. "Please remain seated. We're not here to harm anyone who hasn't earned it." The casual arrogance of the statement was breathtaking. Here, in the heart of galactic civilization, surrounded by representatives of species that had been building stellar empires when humanity was still discovering fire, a member of a barely spacefaring race was issuing orders like she owned the place. "This is an outrage." Counselor Zith's lights flashed in patterns that didn't require translation. "You have violated every principle of galactic law, committed acts of piracy and terrorism, assaulted the sovereign territory of the Council itself." Admiral Chen turned to look at him, her expression visible through her helmet's transparent faceplate. She looked tired, Vexthara realized, bone-deep exhausted in the way that came from carrying too much responsibility for too long. "Violated galactic law," she repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, I suppose we have. But here's the funny thing about law, Counselor. It only works when it's enforced equally. When you let someone commit genocide because they filled out the right paperwork, you don't get to lecture the survivors about proper procedure." "The Zephyrian action was within legal parameters," protested Counselor Fleek. Humanity was not yet a council member. The protective clauses of membership did not apply. "Legal parameters," Admiral Chen nodded slowly. "I've heard that phrase a lot today. It's interesting how often it seems to justify watching children die." She gestured to one of her technical specialists, who activated a holographic projector in the center of the chamber. The device painted the air with images that made several counselors recoil in horror. Scenes from the Zephyrian Purge, recorded by surveillance satellites and refugee ships. "This is Kepler Colony," Admiral Chen narrated as the images shifted. "Population, 4 million, mostly agricultural workers and their families. They surrendered immediately when the Zephyrian fleet arrived. They offered no resistance. The hologram showed Zephyrian ships methodically sterilizing the colony from orbit, their bioweapons turning the atmosphere itself into a caustic soup that dissolved organic matter on contact. "This is the transport ship Mercy's Grace," Admiral Chen continued, "carrying 17,000 refugees, mostly children evacuated from the outer settlements. They broadcast their surrender on all frequencies. They had no weapons, no military value, no strategic importance. The recording showed Zephyrian fighters pursuing the refugee ship through an asteroid field, herding it like prey before finally cornering it against a gas giant. The bioweapon deployment was almost surgical in its precision. And this," Admiral Chen's voice hardened, "is New Geneva, where my brother lived with his family, where the Zephyrians decided to test their newest atmospheric toxin. The final recording showed a world dying in real time, its cities dissolving into gray sludge while panicked transmissions filled the radio spectrum. The Zephyrians had broadcast the entire process as a warning to other human settlements. 18 billion people," Admiral Chen said as the hologram faded, "all killed within legal parameters, all perfectly justified under galactic law. All watched by this council while you debated whether intervention would set a dangerous precedent." The chamber fell silent, except for the distant sounds of human soldiers securing the station. Even Councillor Zith's agitated light patterns had stilled, his crystalline form dim with what might have been shame. "So here we are," Admiral Chen continued, "the last free humans in the galaxy, bringing you a different kind of legal precedent. Today you learn what happens when you teach a warrior species that mercy is weakness. Today you discover why humans have a saying. Those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable." She smiled, and there was no warmth in the expression. "Today, honorable counselors, we teach you about proportional response." The council chamber had become something it had never been in 10 millennia of operation: silent. Representatives from 100 worlds sat in their ancient seats, watching as human technicians systematically dismantled the careful illusion of galactic order that had defined their civilization. Dr. Elena Vasquez, formerly head of xenobiology at the University of New Geneva, now served as Admiral Chen's chief intelligence officer. She moved between the alien delegates with the practiced eye of someone who had spent years studying galactic species, though her current interest was rather more practical than academic. "Councillor Fleek," she said, stopping before the gelatinous Hydran representative, "your species was one of the first to support the Zephyrian request for pacification rights. Your delegates argued quite persuasively that humanity posed a potential biological threat to established galactic ecosystems." Fleek's translucent form rippled with nervous patterns. That was based on preliminary data. We had concerns about human reproductive rates, their aggressive expansion patterns. "Aggressive expansion," Dr. Vasquez repeated, consulting a datapad that looked suspiciously like modified Zephyrian technology. Interesting choice of words. In the 70 years since achieving interstellar travel, humans had established colonies on exactly 18 worlds. The Altarian hegemony conquered 18 systems last Tuesday. High Counselor Vexathara watched this exchange with growing unease. The human scientist wasn't just making accusations, she was presenting evidence. Detailed records of council proceedings that should have been classified at the highest levels. "How did you obtain those files?" Vexathara asked. Dr. Vasquez looked up with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "When the Zephyrians hit our research stations, they captured several human databases. They thought they were collecting intelligence on our military capabilities. What they actually got was a complete archive of every diplomatic communication we'd ever intercepted. The implication hit the chamber like a physical blow. Humanity's intelligence services had been monitoring council communications for decades, recording every debate, every private conversation, every cynical calculation that had shaped galactic policy. "You see," Admiral Chen said, stepping forward to address the assembly, "humans have this unfortunate tendency to assume other species are just as paranoid as we are. So we listened. We recorded. We learned exactly what kind of civilization we were asking to join." She gestured to her technician, who activated another holographic display. This time it showed internal council communications, private messages between delegates discussing the human problem and the most efficient ways to address it. Councillor Zith, 6 months ago, you sent a private communication to the Zephyrian High Command, suggesting that human expansion could be curtailed through selective intervention. You provided them with detailed intelligence on our colony worlds, including defensive capabilities and civilian population centers. The crystalline being's light patterns flashed in protest. That was routine intelligence sharing. The Zephyrians were a council member in good standing. Councillor Thirak of the Centauri Assembly, Admiral Chen continued, reading from her notes. You argued in closed session that humanity's barbaric cultural practices made them unsuitable for civilized society. You specifically cited our tendency toward revenge-based justice systems as evidence of inherent savagery. The insectoid delegate's mandibles clicked nervously. Humans do display concerning violent tendencies. And yet, Dr. Vasquez interjected, the Centauri Assembly maintains death worlds specifically for gladiatorial combat. Your entertainment industry generates significant revenue from watching sentient beings kill each other for sport. That is different, Thirak protested. Those are volunteers, prisoners, genetic construct. Ah yes, Admiral Chen nodded. Genetic constructs, like the modified human clones your military uses for shock troops, clones created from DNA samples obtained from our diplomatic missions. The silence that followed was deafening. Around the chamber, delegates who had spent decades crafting the image of galactic civilization as a peaceful, enlightened society suddenly found themselves confronted with evidence of their own barbarity. The truth is, Admiral Chen said, her voice carrying clearly in the vast space, this council never had any intention of accepting humanity as equals. We were too young, too aggressive, too reminiscent of what you all used to be before you grew civilized and soft. She walked slowly around the chamber's central floor, her armor's servo motors humming softly with each step. You saw in us everything you'd tried to forget about yourselves, the capacity for violence, the willingness to fight and die for principles, the stubborn refusal to accept that might makes right. So you decided to have us eliminated, Dr. Vasquez continued seamlessly. Not openly, of course. That would have been uncivilized. Instead, you found a species willing to do your dirty work. You provided them with intelligence, logistics support, diplomatic cover. You turned genocide into a bureaucratic process. High Counselor Vexathera felt compelled to speak. Even if your accusations are accurate, what do you hope to achieve here? You cannot force the galaxy to accept humanity through violence. Admiral Chen stopped walking and turned to face her. Accept us? Counselor, I think you've misunderstood our purpose here. We're not asking for acceptance anymore. We're not applying for membership in your little club. She smiled, and there was something predatory in the expression. We're serving notice that humanity is withdrawing from galactic civilization entirely. From this day forward, we will have no dealings with the Council, no recognition of galactic law, no participation in your trade networks or diplomatic protocols. That's impossible, Counselor Fleek protested. No species can survive in complete isolation. You need access to our markets, our technology, our collective knowledge. Do we? Dr. Vasquez asked rhetorically. Because it seems to me that your collective knowledge didn't include any way to stop a few thousand humans with stolen ships from taking your most secure facility. Your markets didn't prevent the Zephyrians from committing genocide, Admiral Chen added. Your technology didn't protect 18 billion innocent people from being murdered for the crime of existing. She gestured to the holographic displays showing the ongoing battle for control of the station. Human forces had secured every critical system, dismantled every weapon, captured or destroyed every ship that might have been used to mount a counterattack. Here's what's going to happen, Admiral Chen announced. Humanity is declaring independence from galactic civilization. We're taking our ships, our technology, our people, and we're leaving. We'll find our own worlds, build our own societies, develop our own technologies. And if anyone tries to follow us, her voice hardened to match the cold steel of her armor. If anyone attempts to interfere with human affairs again, if any council member or ally even thinks about touching human space, we will return. And next time, we won't be asking for justice. She looked around the chamber, meeting the gaze of every delegate present. Next time, we'll be delivering it. The implications of her words settled over the chamber like a toxic cloud. Humanity wasn't just leaving. They were becoming something outside the established order. A rogue species with nothing to lose and every reason to hate the galaxy that had betrayed them. You cannot simply declare independence from galactic civilization High Counselor Vexathara protested weakly. Admiral Chen's laugh was cold as vacuum. Watch us. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the UES Defiance, watching as the last of the human fleet prepared to depart from Council space. Behind them, the massive ring structure of the Galactic Council Station drifted silent and dark, its proud spires scarred by plasma fire, and its ancient defenses reduced to twisted metal. It had taken 6 hours to complete their mission. 6 hours to dismantle 10,000 years of galactic order and announce humanity's violent divorce from civilized space. Final casualty report, Admiral, Commander Rodriguez said, approaching with a data pad. His face was grim, but there was something else there too, a sense of completion, of a terrible job finally finished. Go ahead, Sarah said, though she already knew the numbers would be devastating. We lost 11 ships and over 3,000 personnel, he reported. The Zephyrian fleet is completely eliminated, no survivors. Council security forces took heavy casualties, but we followed Geneva Convention protocols for their prisoners. Geneva Convention protocols. It was almost funny in a bitter way. Humanity applying the rules of civilized warfare to aliens who had watched their species burn, without lifting a finger to help. And our passengers? All Zephyrian military personnel captured have been transferred to the diplomatic corps, Rodriguez replied carefully. Dr. Vasquez says the war crimes tribunals should be ready to begin within the month. Sarah nodded. That had been part of the plan from the beginning. Not just revenge, but justice. Real justice conducted by humans according to human law. The kind of justice the Galactic Council had been too civilized to provide. Admiral, came the voice of Lieutenant Kim from the communications station. We're receiving a transmission from the Council station. High Counselor Vexathara is requesting permission to speak with you. Sarah almost smiled. Even now, even after everything that had happened, they were still asking permission, still following protocols and procedures that had failed them so completely. Put her through. The holographic display shimmered to life, showing the crystalline alien's elegant form. Vexathara looked older somehow, her usually perfect features marked by stress fractures that spoke of psychological trauma. Admiral Chen, she said, her musical voice carrying across the void between their ships. I wanted to speak with you before you departed. I'm listening. What you did here today, it will have consequences. There will be those who view humanity as a threat to galactic stability. Your declaration of independence will be seen as an act of war by some species. Sarah's expression didn't change. Then they'll learn the same lesson the Zephyrians did, that humans are very good at war. That's what concerns me, Vexathara said quietly. Admiral, I want you to know that not all of us supported the Council's decision to ignore the Zephyrian actions. There were those who argued for intervention, who believed that justice should apply equally to all species. But not enough of you, Sarah replied. Not nearly enough. No, the alien counselor admitted. Not enough. We failed you. We failed our own principles. We chose the easy path of political expediency over moral courage. Sarah studied the holographic image, seeing something in the alien's posture that might have been shame. It was too little, too late, but at least it was honest. Counselor, let me ask you something, Sarah said. If this situation were reversed, if some alien species had just finished exterminating the Altarian hegemony, and they came to humanity asking for justice, what do you think we would have done? Vexathara was quiet for a long moment. I think, she said finally, that you would have acted. Immediately and without regard for political consequences. Because that is what humans do. You act according to your principles even when it's dangerous. Especially when it's dangerous, Sarah corrected. That's what makes us human. That's what you never understood about us. I understand it now, Vexathara said. The question is, what happens next? Where will humanity go? What will you become? Sarah looked out at the stars, at the vast emptiness that stretched between the spiral arms of the galaxy. Somewhere out there were worlds that had never heard of the Galactic Council, systems that existed beyond the reach of civilized space. We'll find out, she said simply. Humans are good at adaptation. We'll build new homes, new societies, new technologies. We'll become whatever we need to become to survive. And if the Council tries to follow you, Sarah's smile was winter cold, then we'll become their worst nightmare. A species with nothing to lose and every reason to hate them. An enemy that remembers every slight, every betrayal, every innocent life lost to political expedience. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. But if you leave us alone, if you let us disappear into the dark between stars, then maybe, we can both learn to live with what happened here. And the Zephyrians? What justice will they face? Human justice, Sarah replied without hesitation. Swift, certain, and proportional to their crimes. Every officer who participated in the genocide will face trial. Every ship captain who fired on civilians will answer for their actions. Every leader who ordered the extermination of innocent people will pay the price. That sounds like revenge, not justice. The difference, Sarah said, is that revenge feels good. Justice just feels necessary. The communication channel fell silent for several seconds. When Vexthara spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. For what it's worth, I'm truly sorry for what we allowed to happen. I know, Sarah replied. But sorry doesn't bring back 18 billion people. Sorry doesn't undo genocide. Sorry doesn't restore trust that's been shattered beyond repair. She turned away from the display, looking out at her fleet as it prepared for the jump to hyperspace. The age of humanity asking for permission is over, Counselor. From now on, we'll make our own way in the universe. Admiral, Vexthara called out as Sarah moved to disconnect the transmission. Will we ever see humans again? In the council chambers? In galactic society? Sarah paused, considering the question. Maybe, she said finally. But if you do, it won't be as supplicants or applicants. It will be as equals or not at all. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the Defiance in relative silence. Around them, the human fleet began its final preparations for departure. Ships that had once carried refugees and survivors now transformed into something harder and more dangerous. All ships report ready for jump. Admiral, came the report from the navigation station. Sarah took one last look at the council station, at the symbol of galactic civilization that had failed so completely when tested by adversity. Then she turned her back on it forever. Take us out, she commanded. It's time to find out what humanity becomes when it stops asking for permission to exist. The fleet vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind only wreckage and the echo of a species that had learned the most dangerous lesson of all, that sometimes the only way to find justice is to create it yourself. In the years that followed, the Galactic Council would tell themselves that humanity had simply disappeared into the void, lost to the darkness between stars. But in their private moments, in their deepest fears, they knew better. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of civilized space, humanity was growing stronger, learning, adapting, becoming something the galaxy had never seen before, a species forged in betrayal and tempered by loss, with nothing to prove to anyone except themselves. And if the galaxy was very lucky, it would never see them again. But luck, as humanity had learned the hard way, was not something you could count on. The universe was vast and dark, but it was not empty. And somewhere in that darkness, humans were building something new, something terrible and beautiful and free, something that would never again ask permission to exist.